usually people underestimate the pricing power they have in the market. So I see, even if you had to do it blind, the chances are that you could make more money by raising prices, even poorly, is better than what you're doing.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
Man, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Jennings Executive Search. I had a great conversation with John Jennings about the skills needed in different pricing roles. He and I think a lot alike. If you're looking for a new pricing role, or if you're trying to hire just the right pricing person, I strongly suggest you reach out to Jennings Executive Search. They specialize in placing pricing people. Say that 3 times fast. Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the designed relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving, and today our guest is Ulrik Lehrskov-Schmidt, and I will never say that again. Here are 3 things you want to know about Ulrik before we start. He is the managing partner of willingness-to-pay.com, and that is the coolest URL I've ever seen. He's founded and sold 2 different companies, and he has a master's degree from Harvard. Oh, and I saw a couple of videos of his on SaaS pricing and agreed with every single word, so I thought I'd invite him on the podcast. Welcome, Ulrik.
Thank you. Happy to be here. So it's good. I think you're the one who saw the video. So it's always good when you publish something that gets out there.
That somebody sees it.
Yeah, exactly. So
hey, how did you get into pricing?
So first as a business owner. So the first company I had, which was a media company focused on commercial real estate. And we monetized all the media through conference tickets. And so it would be like we would put on half-day events on, let's say, development opportunities in so-and-so area. And then we would sell tickets for the events for, let's say, $500. And then obviously, if you raise the prices, you make more money. And so we, in the team, debated whether we would raise prices for, I think, 6 months. And we had all the arguments. Like, if we raise prices to $600, we can afford losing 16% of customers and so forth. And in the end, I had no process to actually answer the question except just try it, right? So we raised prices to $600 a ticket and just made those 20% extra. Right, so it's just like the 0 impact on elasticity. So naturally, I waited like 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, and then I did it again. And then I shouldn't have, because then actually we hit some sort of barrier, and we had to actually roll back and go back to $600. And then I sold the business, and the owner who took it over after I sold it then changed it to a subscription model where he would charge people, I think, $3,000 for all the conferences they get to attend given a year, and then he tripled revenue, right? So I think that actually sort of is a great example of things I started to ponder after that. It was like, okay, so one thing is the price point, but another thing is the model that you wrap it into, and that can be, in that sense, the pricing model is a part of the product that you sell. So fast forward like another couple of businesses and maybe almost a decade. And my wife actually, she studied at Harvard and came back and wanted to operationalize a lot of the things that she had been into over there, which was behavioral economics. And she asked me if I wanted to co-write a book on the psychology of pricing, which is, from an academic standpoint, something that we've just both been interested in. So we wrote a book on the psychology of pricing and went into charm pricing and all these different aspects on it, published that, and then we needed to do like a speaking tour on the book, and then people wanted me to help them with their pricing, and I said yes, and then suddenly I was a consultant. So that's sort of the backstory.
Nice. I don't know if you know this, but my dissertation was on 99 cents.
Yeah, I read that on your bio. So it's one of the questions I get most often. Like people, they feel they're a little bit in on the know when they notice details like that and then start asking about it. And
it's funny that it does matter, but very, very little. Right? It's so you worry about other things, not about that.
Yeah. So I usually run sort of a hierarchy of things to worry about, and actually optimization comes sort of at the end. But things like this, sort of where you do sort of micro optimization on churn pricing, like 95 prices to 99, comes sort of at the very end, right? But it does matter, and so if you have all the structures right and you know what you're selling and you have the volume to run data, you can squeeze out like those extra percentages that really matter.
Right. And by the way, you can squeeze out the extra percentage if you don't have everything right, but getting everything else right is worth way more than those couple little percentages of 99 cents. So
yeah, so the catchphrase I use is that the money is in the structure, right, and not in the individual price points. So
nice. So tell us how you think about the structure of SaaS pricing. Do you have a hierarchy or the top level that says these are the three things that really matter?
So I think it has to do with my entry point into pricing, right, which was the psychology of pricing. So I have a master's degree in finance, so it's not like I don't know how to run Excel sheets, but I think a lot of the companies that I started working with didn't have the data that was necessary to run any kind of elasticity analysis and so forth. And also, it wasn't something I had done professionally, and I think I was acutely aware that there are just other people that does it better. And then, on the other hand, I had been operationally involved in running businesses for so long that I could just, let's say, immediately realize that even if I came up with some optimal price, we needed to do a lot of other things as well, or maybe even before that for it to work. So my approach to pricing was as a design task, right? So my thinking usually goes something like this. Pricing needs to fit product, and those two needs to fit the sales model or the acquisition model, depending on how you do your customer acquisition, and then that needs to fit the service model. So it's the combination of these sort of four sub-models that generates the commercial output. So my focus is always on that, to generate pricing that fits the product model and so forth. But from a design or structural perspective, I usually I have sort of 4-step simple SaaS pricing design model that I usually want, where it's figure out what the company is able to do. So what are the capabilities? So the example I always use is a railroad. You can take people from A to B. Then you do high-level segmentation, which I call fencing, which is not sort of in the traditional sort of revenue management type where you fence markets, but more in the sense that if you have segments that are so different that they need different pricing models and product models, that's sort of the first thing you need to figure out. So for trains, that would be freight transportation and passenger transportation. Like they're so different that you need to sell them differently and market them differently and price them differently. Beneath that, you have the product model. So first, second, third class tickets. And then you have pricing, which is, the longer you go, the more you have to pay. And then at the very end comes price points. So you have this sort of hierarchy of questions that are answered in a specific sequence in order to get to your complete model, right? So the segments, the product, pricing model, price points.
So I actually love that. And in a lot of ways that fits the way I think about it. I usually think there are these three value levers, and I define those as market segmentation, your packaging, and your pricing metric. And so you could call those the same thing as your last three. And I like the fact that you put a hierarchy on them. I often think of them as iterative, right? So I might want to change my packaging based on my pricing metric, or so sometimes there's some flow back. But I think that in general, the way you phrase them probably makes a lot of sense in terms of designing the initial models that we're going to go through.
Yeah, and I think sort of I piggyback right on. I agree that there's flow back, and that's sort of part of what a design process is, right? It's not, there's not a perfect outcome. There is a workable outcome, a functional outcome. So you run through, and then you might want to go back and change something if there's a better outcome to be had. But you just don't figure it out until you're later in the process, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that happens in a lot of businesses, and tell me if you see this much, the segmentation piece, companies just assume they have it right. Mm-hmm. They don't think about it. And so they've built a product and they sell it to everybody and they call it generic. And then once they sit down and really think about what are the problems we're solving for who, then they realize, wow, there's a whole different way to talk to our market, to build products for our market, to price for our market.
Yeah, so I, and maybe it's sort of just inherent laziness, but I usually, when I think about segmentation, I do it on sort of these two levels. Sort of one is at that sort of fencing level where, okay, we have totally different segments and we need to design differently for each of them. But down in the packaging, at the packaging or the product packaging level, I usually segment based on a jobs to be done framework, where I try to find sources of demand first and then just package around those, right? So, and this can be, I think the reasoning for this is that it's the best concept I have found so far that you can use in a design process to really align the product department with the sales department. So the jobs to be done being that we're not trying to find a problem, we're trying to find a problem that has demand sort of wrapped around it, right? So because really if you find such a problem, then suddenly you can. So for example, earlier today I talked with a company that does the HR data analysis, and so they do analysis of sort of employee satisfaction and so forth. And so we talked about how should we package this, and I said, well, what are they trying to get done by buying a solution like yours? And we had a conversation, and then a few things emerged. But one of the things are, for example, employee retention, right? So saying, okay, employee retention seems to be something that all of their customers are focused on. They have budget for it. They have very clear understanding of the costs associated with this, and so forth. And then we just can pull in features from their software product and from their service offering and so forth, and wrap it around this particular outcome for the customer, right? And say, okay, we have a retention package, and then maybe right next to it we have a recruitment package, and then we might have a performance management package and so forth. But each of these are identified precisely because they have budget and they do have attention. They have action inside of the customer's organizations that sort of tries to get this done, which makes it, essentially have product market fit.
Yeah, and I have no qualms about that whatsoever. I agree completely. In fact, I often think about value as companies have problems. Mm-hmm. When they solve the problem, they get some result, which is typically a measurable, quantifiable result, which yields to some dollar value or additional profit to the end customer. And so it doesn't bother me where we are in there as long as customers recognize it, right? That's the way I think about it is if a customer is thinking in terms of customer retention or employee retention, then I think that's great. Let's talk about employee retention. Mm-hmm. But if they're thinking in terms of we have too high turnover, great. Let's talk about the turnover and talk about the problems there. Sure.
So I think that's where. So one of the I think so we agree a lot. I think this is one of the gospels that I usually sing when I talk to startups is that a lot of startups I meet are, and these can be even sort of, let's say, not very early, but even sort of later stage startups are very much focused on solving a valuable problem with their customers, but they're missing whether or not that customer actually has demand for solving that problem, right? And usually I call these prescriptive solutions. Like I build a piece of software on the assumption that if only my customer would use the software to solve this problem, then it would generate value. But their customers just don't care. They're just busy doing other things, right? So it's a prescriptive solution. It's something I think you ought to do. Like you need to exercise and eat well, right? But 90% of people won't do it.
Yes, fabulous insight. So I think, by the way, I love this banter because I love thinking how you think and how I think, right? And so the way I think about that is we need to make sure we're going after people who have the problem. Then we prefer people who know they have the problem. Then we prefer people who are trying to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Right. Which is essentially what you just said, right?
So and this is the I think this is a really good clue as to whether you're actually discovering something that does exist in the world, right? If you find other people that says the same thing using other words, right? Because then usually we're actually describing a real aspect of reality, right?
Yeah.
So I think part of my background is not as a formally trained pricing consultant. So I essentially sort of picked up other frameworks like design frameworks and so forth to try and solve the problem of pricing. So I like to speak to more, let's say, actually educated people about this. Like, oh, okay, they thought about this for 20 years. I didn't know that. I thought I was sort of, I came up with it yesterday, right? So, and that happens to me more than I care to admit, right? But there you go.
Yeah. Well, if you were in finance, I want to brag for a second. I invented utility theory long before economists knew it existed.
Yeah.
Nothing. It was one of those aha moments I had. And then when I took economics classes, I realized, oh, they've been talking about this for 100 years.
Yeah, there you go. So I know that feeling. So, but it's what do you think about this, the concept of sort of doing quantitative optimization of packaging in terms of measuring preferences and utilities with conjoint studies and all these things to create better bundles?
I think conjoint is brilliant if you can get enough respondents, because you can get a decent perspective of the way people think. Because people are making choices instead of asking them, how much would you pay for this or whatever other metric you want to use. So I'm a huge fan of conjoint. I think an even better way to do packaging, though, is if you have a lot of customers and you're tracking usage data, use the usage data as representations of who cares about what features. And I think that's a much more effective way to do packaging.
Yeah, so I have sort of a lot of half-baked theory about how to measure these things, because I've sort of tried to create taxonomies of features, essentially to do this kind of analysis, right? So my example is something like, okay, so usage is correlated with value, okay, but then you think about, well, what if I use the customer support a lot, right? Is that because I have a lot of issues with the product and I'm really, annoyed with it? But so I would prefer not to use the customer support a lot, but I am, right? Because I'm constantly running into issues. So and this is, common sense will solve like 95% of all these issues a lot. But if you wanted to teach, let's say, a computer how to measure preferences and utility, you run into problems like that. And then on the inverse side, you have features like source code escrow. So some of the startups I work with, if they have to sell to really high-end enterprise clients, sometimes they are these enterprise clients are demanding from the startup that they put their source code in escrow. So if ever they go bankrupt, the enterprise clients is going to keep operating, right? So this feature you don't want to use ever, right? But it just has to sit there, right? So you have this situation where most features, it is true that the more you use them, the more valuable they are. But you have these exceptions where some features actually are inversely correlated, where more usage is actually sort of less valuable in some sense, and others are just totally sort of uncorrelated at all, right? Yep. So I've tried to sort of come up with anything from hygiene theory to other kinds of taxonomies to just like orchestrate features in order to do this kind of analysis, but I've got nowhere, right? So,
So my perspective on that is I don't need a computer to do it. I'm going to require a person to look at it and figure it out. So once you start looking at usage, and what I find fascinating when you look at usage closely is people, and we started the conversation with people don't know their market segments. Mm-hmm. And if you start watching usage, what you're going to see is some people use these 3 features a ton, and other people don't use them at all, but they use these other features a lot. And I can tell you right now, those are 2 different market segments. I don't even know what the features are, but those are 2 different market segments because they're solving different problems and doing different things. And so when we start looking at our own usage, I don't know that I would even try to use AI or computerize this. I would always look at it and say, now, why is it that these people are using this? What are they trying to do that these people aren't trying to do? And so that's how I would think about it.
Yeah, no, and that's what I do too, right? So I think the reason I am a pricing consultant is that for some reason I find it endlessly fascinating to sort of think about how these things work, right? And this sort of because to me it feels like a magic puzzle, right? Yep. So you go in there and you have all these pieces, and you have this sort of sense that if you put them together just right, you can create fantastic results for these people that, you know, through the process you start to care about, right? And that I just enjoy that very much. I don't know why, but it just is, right? It's just like my favorite thing. So
and it has such a huge impact on your customers.
Yeah.
Right. So, okay. So I'm going to ask you one more question that I'm really curious about. Pontificate for a minute on good, better, best on the 3 tiers of products.
So I like tiered systems. I think the idea that you split them into, okay, worse, and worthless, isn't very good, right? So because actually exactly sort of segueing off of the conversation we had a second ago, which is usually this is sort of, I see a lot of these good, better, best models created by people who have no understanding of what the product actually does for the customer, right? So there's this tendency where we say, well, you know, the best one should have all the most advanced features that we are the newest and that we just spend a lot of resources developing. And then the first one, the good one, the worst of the 3 should be, you know, barely usable. Okay, right? But really, usually what you're doing is you're just splitting one source of demand into sort of 3, let's say, affordability categories, instead of actually identifying 3 individual sources of demand and then packaging according to that, right? And so, for example, with the good, better, best model, I see a lot of startups struggling with their good one, the entry level one, because it's just not good enough. If they make it better, it cannibalizes the other ones and so forth. And I think the solve to this is just to change your framework entirely and just look at packaging differently, like with the jobs to be done theory. But the tiered model, I like and use all the time. I think.
What do you mean when you say tiered model? Just to make sure we're all on the same page.
So the idea that all the functionality in one bundle or package is included in one other, right? So, and that they are substitute products. Like I would never buy the basic and the advanced tier. I buy the advanced tier, and all the basic features are in that tier, right? As opposed to modules that have different functionality and can be bought independently of each other, right? So for me, there are 2 different high-level toolboxes to do price discrimination: pricing metrics and packaging, right? Packaging runs on functionality and pricing metric runs on some sort of volume or usage. Yep. And together you can, you know, pretty much, let's say, solve for every customer.
So I don't understand something then. You said you like tiered packaging. I think of that as good, better, best. Right. When I define good, better, best, I think of the tiered packages. How much functionality am I giving you in which package? And yet you seem to not like good, better, best, but you do like tiered. What's the difference? What am I missing?
So I did, for example, it's one of the cases I used publicly. I did a pricing project for a large German manufacturing and logistics conglomerate. They do all the luggage transportation systems in airports. So they have 1,000 airports globally, and they do all the hardware. And they had come up with a software application for that. And essentially, they had created a 4-step good, better, best model for that. And that would be, so it was a data analysis software, and it would be something like, well, we describe the data, then we diagnose the data, then we prescribe what to do, and then we do something else. So it was sort of a classical machine learning AI escalation of sophistication, right? So at one level, I could just see the data, then I could understand the data, then I could sort of predict what would happen next, and then I could simulate new scenarios. And then we looked at that and said, well, who would actually use any of these? Because it's pretty obvious that you need to go pretty far back in the chain for it to be useful. And then they were going into their customers' organization and saying, well, it seems like the maintenance teams in the airports, they would want predictive maintenance because that's really where the money is. The operational teams, they just want the describe part because they're just going to pull the data out and then use it in their own system. And then airport management would have something else. So they were about to sort of feature toggle all of this and say, well, the sales teams will figure out, and maybe maintenance can buy one thing and operations can buy another. And sort of basic combinatorial math showed that they would have more product combinations that there would be airports in the world, right? Because of all this sort of feature toggling that they were about to enter into. And then I essentially said, well, what is the first sales meeting always about? And I call this the point of first demand. So whenever you sort of enter with a new customer, what is it always the first thing you talk about? And the thing that they always talk with the customers about first was predictive maintenance, always the entry point. So it's like, okay, why don't we make maintenance the first package? And everything you can do, every service, everything you can do around maintenance, every dashboard and so forth, we put that in the first tier. And then you ask yourself the question, if we solve maintenance, what is the next thing we can sell them or solve for them? So if they solve maintenance, the next thing they want to do is they want to solve operations. So you do maintenance in tier 1 and you do operations in tier 2. And then the next thing you do is management, because then you do simulation of whether or not to build a new terminal and so forth. So then you have a tier structure that is maintenance, operations, management. Yep. And it's not good, better, best, they're just different. But because of the expansion life cycle of the customer, they are sequential. They're ordered in a specific way. And you have that sort of in your packaging. Does it make sense?
I understand the words. I would still call that good, better, best in the sense that better is everything good has plus more.
Sure. And so that's what I say sort of it's simply for me just tiered structure. But the good, better, best to me is something, let's say, more than that. It's a specific version of a tiered structure to me. That's how I use the words anyways. Okay.
And I also think good, better, best done well tells a story, right? Here's what you can do. It isn't the features, it's the capability. Or let's go back to outcomes or results, right? What are the results you can get with good? What are the results you can get with better? What are the results you can get with best? So that's how I often think about good, better, best. And a great example of that is when companies go to enterprise, right? If I'm going to sell a good version, I probably don't have enterprise level features, but as soon as I sell to enterprise, I've got single sign-on and extra security and so a bunch of capabilities that really matter to the people who are willing to pay me more. And so that's how I tend to think of the good, better, best packaging.
No, so I think I understand where a lot of people are coming from, and for me, it's just I think it's missing the crucial point that it's good because it's only good if it does something very specific. So it needs to have a specific, complete, let's say, job that it solves would be the terminology I use. So it can do these things. And by the way, I usually say that enterprise is a job. And it's actually so. So when we compare features across a lot of different software applications, the features often have wildly different value depending on what kind of solutions they're in there. But usually what happens is that as organizations grow large, they just need a specific set of features to use a software application, like single sign-on, audit trails, advanced roles and permission, P&L specific billing. Like there's a bunch of features that as you sell to large enough organizations, they sort of need this sort of, it's a hygiene list, right? So they just need to cross it. It doesn't provide value, it just allows them to use the software. So I have actually sometimes with luck in modular packaging used enterprise as a module. It's an add-on. It's just a security and compliance add-on that just provides all these features, depending a little bit on what kind of expansion methodology you would have elsewhere. Yep. But really it's so case specific with how the sales narrative is performed within that organization, how you should actually sort of run that product. And actually also to some degree how different the sizes of customers you have are, right? So some businesses sell to customers where the smallest and largest are like a 10x of each other, and others it's a 10,000x literally. So and that matters a lot as well to what kind of packaging you can pull off.
Yeah. Ulrik, this has been so much fun. I could talk to you for hours, I think. This is just a hoot. But we're going to have to start wrapping it up, and I'm going to ask you the last question.
Sure.
What's one piece of pricing advice you would give our listeners that you think could have a big impact on their business?
It's just going to be the Nike slogan. Just do it. I see so many people that just don't do it. Right? They procrastinate, and it's fear-based, right?
What do you mean by just do it? Do what?
So usually people underestimate the pricing power they have in the market. So I see, even if you had to do it blind, the chances are that you could make more money by raising prices, even poorly, is better than what you're doing. And it's the fear that by actually doing something you will lose compared to losing out by not doing something. So there is this vacuum of responsibility that if nobody touches anything, it's nobody's fault. And so executives really sort of need to own this and drive pricing to some extent. But it just needs to be done. It doesn't happen on its own. Especially it doesn't happen in sales. Usually doesn't happen in product either, even though they often own it. So for me, the execution part is the most important part, because you can bury yourself before you ever get anything done.
I love your phrase, a vacuum of responsibility. That is just so spot on. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Ulrik, thank you so much for your time today. If anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that? Oh, and make sure you mention the new book that's coming out.
Yeah, so my website is willingness2pay.com, so you can find the book there as well. But it's published, I hope, just before Christmas. My publisher is trying to make me publish it just after Christmas because she tells me that there's too much competition there. But it's going to be called The Pricing Roadmap, and it's coming out through Houndstone Press. And yeah, so find it on Amazon, and if not, you can subscribe to sort of like a pre-order list on my website, and I'll let you know in the newsletter.
Awesome. Thank you. And can anyone reach out to you on LinkedIn?
Sure. So just Google my name, Ulrik Lehrskov-Schmidt, and I'm right there on LinkedIn. So they're welcome to. Yeah. All
right. Perfect. Episode 192 is all done. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this, would you please leave us a rating and a review? The easiest way to do that is to go to ratethispodcast.com/impact pricing, and your reviews are extremely valuable. And finally, if you have any questions or comments about the podcast or pricing in general, feel free to email me, mark@impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact. Thanks again to Jennings Executive Search for sponsoring our podcast. If you're looking to hire someone in pricing, I suggest you contact someone who knows pricing people. Contact Jennings Executive Search.